Chapter 11. The tunnel led gently downward, and after the first dozen steps, they were in the darkness. Mrs. Frisby could see nothing at all. Behind her, Mr. Ages limped along. Ahead, she could hear the scuffle of Justin's footsteps. She followed the sound blindly. Then she heard his voice. "Just walk straight forward, Mrs. Frisby. There's nothing to trip over and nothing to bump into. If you get off course, you'll feel the wall," he added. "The dark part doesn't last long." Now, what did he mean by that? She thought it over for a minute or two as she walked and had just decided to ask him, when to her surprise she saw ahead of her a faint glow, a light. But how could there be a light down so far? They were through it, said Justin cheerfully. "Now I know the blackout bit must be annoying the first time, but it's necessary. But aren't we underground?" "Oh yes, about 3 feet down by now, I'd guess." "Then how can it be light?" "I could tell you," Justin said, "but if you'll wait 15 seconds, you'll see for yourself." In a few more steps, the tunnel Mrs. Frisby could now discern dimly in shape and direction took a turn to the right, and she did see for herself. She stopped in astonishment. Ahead of her stretched a long, well-lit hallway. Its ceiling and walls were smoothly curved arch, its floor hard and flat, with a soft layer of carpet down the middle. The light came from the wall, where every foot or so on both sides a tiny light bulb had been received, and the hole in which it stood like a small window had been covered with square of covered glass, blue, green, or yellow. The effect was that of stained glass window in sunlight. Justin was watching her and smiling. "Do you like it? The carpet and the colored glass we don't really for a look. They cut the glass, believe it or not, from old bottles. The carpet was a piece of trim they found somewhere." "It's beautiful," Mrs. Frisby said. But how we've had electricity for 4 years now." "5, said Mr. Ages. "5, said Justin barely. "The lights, they were very small, very bright, twinkling kind we found on trees. In fact, most of our light came from the trees. Not until after Christmas. Of course, about New Year's, the big light bulbs we have trouble handling." Mrs. Frisby was familiar with electricity. Her husband, who knew all kinds of things, had once explained to her. At night, she said, she had seen the lamps shining in Mr. Fitzgibbon's house. At Christmas time, the lights that his son strung on a pine tree outside. "You mean you just took them?" she asked. "We were careful to take only a few from each tree," said Mr. Ages. "It was like picking fruit." Justin said, rather dreaming. "The annual light bulb harvest. We had to go quite far up the road before we had enough. Even so, it took till Christmas." "Justin," said Mr. Ages, "I think we'd better get on." They continued along the corridor, which curved always slightly to the right, and so Mrs. Frisby could never really tell how long it was, and which soon began to incline more steeply into the ground. Mrs. Frisby noticed that the air, which should have been dank and damned so deep underground, was on the contrary fresh and clean, and she thought she could even detect a very faint breeze blowing past her ears as she moved. In a few more minutes, the hall widened abruptly into a large oval chamber. Here the lights were reset in the ceiling, and as at the far end, Mrs. Frisby could see the long tunnel continued and looked as if it slanted upward again, perhaps to another entrance and a back door. Was this then their destination, the main hall of the rats? But if so, where were all the other rats? The room was entirely empty, not even a stick of furniture. A storeroom, said Justin, sometimes full, now empty. Then she said that off one side of the chamber there was a stairway leading down, and beside it a small door. Justin led them to the door. For fright only, he said, with a grin at Mr. Aegis. But considering your limb, I think we can make an exploration. The stairs wouldn't be easy. Mr. Frisby looked at the stairway. It went down in a spiral, and each step was neatly inlaid with a rectangular piece of slate. She could not tell how far it led, since after the turn of the spiral she could see no more, but she had the feeling it was a long way down. As Justin said, it would be hard for Mr. Aegis. Justin opened the door. It led into a square room. That looks like a closet. After you, he said. Mr. Frisby went in. The others followed, and the door swung shut. On the wall were two knobs. Justin pushed one of them, and Mrs. Frisby, who had never been in an elevator before, gasped and almost fell as she felt the floor suddenly sink beneath her feet. Justin reached out a hand and steadied her. "It's all right," he said. "I should have warned you, but we're falling." "Not quite. We're going down, but we've got two strong cables and electric motor holding us." Still, Mrs. Frisby held her breath during the rest of the descent, until finally the small elevator came to a gentle stop and Justin opened the door. Then she breathed again and looked out. The room before her was at least 3 times as big as the one they had just left, and corridors resonated from it in as many directions and petals and from a daisy. Directly opposite the elevator, an open arch led into what looked like a still larger room, seemingly some kind of an assembly hall, for it had a raised platform at one end, and now there were rats by dozens, rats standing and talking in groups of 2 and 3s and 4s. Rats walking slowly, rats hurrying, rats carrying papers. And as Mrs. Frisby stepped from the elevator, it became obvious that strangers were a reality down there. For the strangers were hubbub of a dozen conversations stopped abruptly, and all heads turned to look at her. Then they did not look hostile nor were their alarmed, since her 2 companions were familiar to them, but merely curious. Then, as quickly as it had died out, the sound of talking began again, as if the rats were too polite to stand and stare. But one of the rats were too polite and stand and stare. But one of them, a lean rat with a scarred face, left his group and walked toward them. "Justin, Mr. Aegis, and I see you have a guest." He spoke graciously, with an air of quiet dignity, and Mrs. Frisby noticed 2 more things about him. First, the scar on his face ran across his left eye, and over this eye he wore a black patch fastened by a cord around his head. Second, he carried a satchel rather like a hand bag, but by a strap over his shoulder. I guess whose names will recognize, said Justin. She said, "Is Mr. Mrs. Jonathan Frisby. Mrs. Frisby, this is Nicodemus. A name I recognize indeed," said the rat called Nicodemus. "Mrs. Frisby, are you perhaps aware of this? Your late husband was one of our greatest friends. You are welcome here." "Thank you," said Mrs. Frisby, but she was more puzzled than ever. "In fact, I did not know that you knew my husband, but I'm glad to hear it because I've come to ask your help." "Mr. Frisby has a problem," said Mr. Aegis, "and an urgent one." "If we can help you, we will," said Nicodemus. He asked Mr. Aegis, "Can it wait until after the meeting? An hour?" "We were just ready to begin again." Mrs. Frisby, Mr. Aegis considered an hour will make no difference, I think. Nicodemus said, "Justin, show Mrs. Frisby to the library where she can be comfortable until the meeting is over." By this time, the last of the other assembled rats had made their way into a large meeting hall where they sat facing the various platforms. Nicodemus followed them, pulling some papers and a small reading glass from the schedule at his side, and as he walked to the front of the room, Justin led Mrs. Frisby in the other direction, down a corridor to the left, and again she had the impression of a faint, cool breeze against her face. She realized that the corridor she had walked in above was merely a long entrance, and that's the hall around her where the rats were real living quarters. The one which Justin led her was lined with doors, one of which he opened. "And here," he said, "the room they entered was a big square, well lit, had a faint musty smell. It's reasonably comfortable, and if you'd like to read," he gestured the wall at a wall. They were lined with shelves from floor to ceiling, and on the shelves stood Mrs. Frisby, dragged in her memory. "Books," she said. "They're books," said Justin. Do you read much?" "Only a little," said Mr. Frisby. "My husband taught me and the children." She started to tell him how, laboriously scratching letters in the earth with a stick. It seemed so long ago. But Justin was leaving. "Excuse me, I've got to go to the meeting. I hate meetings, but this one's important. We're finishing up the schedule for the plan," he pronounced with the capital T. The plan, but he was out of the door, closing it gently behind. Mrs. Frisby looked around her. The room, the library, Nicodemus had called it, had in addition to its shelves of books, several tables with benches beside them, and on these were stacked more books. Some of them he had taught her and the children to read. The children had mastered it quickly, but she herself could barely manage the simplest words. She had thought perhaps it was because she was older. He had also told her about electricity. He had known these things, and so it emerged did the rat. It had never occurred to her until now to wonder how he knew them. He had always known so many things, and she had accepted that as a matter of course. But who had taught him to read? Strangely, It also emerged that he had known the rats. Had they taught him what had been in his connection with them. She remembered his long visit with Mr. Ages and knew the rats, and Mr. Ages knew the rats too. So she sighed. Perhaps when the meeting was over and she had a chance to talk to Nicodemus and had told him about Timothy and moving day, perhaps when that was settled, he could explain all this to her. She noticed at a far end of the room a section of wall where there were no bookshelves. There was instead a blackboard covered with words and number written in white chalk. There were pieces of chalk and a eraser in a rack at the bottom of it. The blackboard stood near the end of the longest of the table. Was the library also used as a classroom? When she looked at the blackboard and rather laboriously read what was written on it, she saw that it was not. It was rather a conference room. At the top of the board, in large letters, were printed the words, "The Plan of Rats of NIMH."